So, so I'll just go ahead and start. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. And it's a special pleasure for me to introduce my dear friend SELILIYE Belinda Claxton from Tsaot, the Saanich Nation, a speaker of the Sanchathan language, and a dear friend over many, many years. And we're going to talk to you today um, about mostly the plants and places around Sidney Island and around the territory of the Saanich people um, that are important and have been important for thousands of years. We call this talk Learning from the Earth because that's where the source of knowledge comes from, and it's been developed and shared over um, many, many generations. So SELILIYE, welcome and thank you for joining me as co-presenters of this. And I want to recognize you and the members of your nation. There you are, SELILIYE, with our friend, our mutual friend, Setlima, Joan Morris from the Songhees Nation, and your nephew, Dr. Nick Claxton, and Hayakwa for to everyone from your nation. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you and your family and the other teachers that I've had as an ethnobotanist. And you know, I met your mom many years ago, Elsie Claxton. She was an amazing knowledge holder and a dear friend. And we spent a lot of time with both of our mothers out on the land, and brings back a lot of memories. We also worked with Vi Williams and earlier with Christopher Paul from Sartlip. And we want to recognize all of those knowledge holders, the Elliott family, the Claxton family, the Paul family, and all the others from the different communities of the Saanich Nation. Thank you to Beatrice and Stephanie and to others for the work that you're doing. And thanks to our friends, teachers, students, and supporters over the years. And I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to SELILIYE, who can just go ahead and introduce yourself, SELILIYE, if you want, and talk about your background and your connections to plants.
Thank you, Nancy. My name is SELILIYE. I received that name from my grandmother, my mom's mother. And this is my brother, Yalquetza. He's my oldest brother. And he knew our language fluently. All my brothers and sisters spoke the language fluently. I understood the language fluently. Spoke very little of it because I went to day school, and a lot of my plants and my teaching came from my mother. So she taught me quite a bit, and she worked really closely with Nancy, her and Vi Williams, and like I was saying, Earl is the oldest. And I learned a lot from him as well. All my brothers and sisters, I think I have one brother left, my brother Lou, but my other brothers and sisters were all gone. My mom, she's been gone, be 21 years, March 31st, and she was 93 years old when she passed away. I think she probably would have lasted longer, but she had a small little spot on her lungs. But she taught us a lot about plants, and she taught us a lot about fishing and about Gahming. There was a story that she told us of what my dad was taught about Gahming, and that I think that's the English name is consumption plant, isn't it, Nancy?
It is Selilia and
Yeah.
or wild celery. We'll have a slide of it in a little
Mhm.
while.
So a lot of my teachings and the stories came from my mother and my late brother Earl, and of course Nancy. I've learned a lot from her too, and we've been pals in the wilderness there, and learning about cedar plants, about the cedar trees and different plants and different stories, and so I've been very fortunate. Thank you.
Thanks. Um, since we're sort of focusing a little bit on Sidney Island, I went back to some interviews that I did with Celilia's late brother, Dr. Earl Claxton Sr., Ilquita. And he remembers traveling with his family, with his parents, and stopping by at Sidney Island and a place on the cliffs where his dad could get water even in the hottest part of the summer, some seepage, a spring that came down, and they would always make some tea and get something to eat, and then they would head on their way. Um, Earl knew lots about the places all around. There they are. The water's always dripping there. It doesn't matter how hot of a summer. Yeah, and then back down around the beach and then on home to Tseot. And he remembered how, as kids, they would go over to Sidney Island and be playing. And his parents would watch the water, and there was a certain place, a certain level of the tide when a rock was uncovered or just barely covered. And that's when they knew it was time to go. And then the current just carried them home. If they just all piled into the canoe right away, and the current would almost take them home with very little work. Did you experience that, Celilia? Were you ever part of
Um,
that? You were the
I was
youngest,
I
right?
was very, very young, but I, like my brother was saying and my mother, that Sydney Island, and I can't remember this Enchanted name, but it meant that it was submerged by the waves, and the waters were their roads. Um, they would travel all over the place, and I remember as a kid going to all the islands, and I remember once my mom and dad went and stopped at one of the islands. It'll just about this time of the year, and now was spring, and we used to go, and she'd be going picking seaweeds, and my mom said, "You go up there and go and pick your fawn lilies and the shooting stars and all the native plants." And I used to go and pick a bouquet of flowers, and I remembered that because I could smell them even before we even got to the beach. And my dad would be burning some kahming on the beach, and I asked him why he was burning. I was only 8 years old, and I asked him, "Why are you burning kahming?" And he says, "We burn it because we have to make sure that we feed all the salmon so
Mm.
that the salmon will return." So every beach that he got to, he would remember to burn some kahming to thank the fish for being plentiful and make sure that they're welcome back again. And that's how important the kahming was for us. So I remember that very vaguely, and but a lot of other history came from my mom and my brothers and sisters because I was about 8, 9 years old, not too long after I lost my dad from a massive heart attack. And so my mom was alone the rest of her life, and a lot of teachings from my mother. And she was telling me that the springs from all the islands, they knew all the spots where to get nice ice cold spring water. And now, because of residential homes now, those spots are all dried up now, so they're not as plentiful anymore.
Mhm. That's so interesting because I read a story that had been recorded from a Saanich elder by Diamond Jeunesse, who is an ethnographer with the National Museum. And it was about the salmon people coming, and how they were, the young men who brought the salmon home were told
Hmm.
to burn kachmin all along the beach to feed the spirits of the salmon people. And so
Hmm.
it's interesting that you got that same teaching. That's so neat. There it is, the kachmin, and the first salmon ceremony has been brought back, and here it's being um,
Being
cele-
honored.
celebrated, honored at Seo, right near
Yeah.
Seliliye's house. Um, a beautiful ceremony with the kachmin, which has a kind of a celery, spicy celery scent to it.
That was the Tucky, the uh, oh, what's the English name for that? No, the king of all fish, anyways. That we always had to highly respect that fish, and honor that sockeye. Is
Aha.
called Ducky because it's the king of all fish, and we would never be higher than the sockeye. We always had to honor, highly respect that fish. And then when the first fish was caught, all the kids would honor it and bring, as you can see, they're bringing one home, and that would be our first catch of the year. And that's why the kids were the ones that would bring the first sockeye.
Mm, thank you. Um, and you told me, Celilia, you and your mom used to sometimes get these onions down at Sidney Spit,
Yes.
or
Yes,
at Tseot.
yeah, at
Pacific
Seot,
Spit.
or even wherever we can harvest them. You can really smell them. There's nice, strong onion smell, and they would use that and put them in their cooking, and when they're doing pit cooking, in the cavity of the fish or
Mm,
the wild crab apples.
uh-huh. So just back up a bit and talk about this amazing knowledge system that is held by people living close to the land. In any part of the world, it's sometimes called traditional ecological knowledge and wisdom. And my friend Fikret Burke has written about that, this knowledge and how important it is uh, for people to learn about sustainability, a cumulative body of knowledge, practice, and belief that's handed down through generations and is transmitted culturally. And here's my dear friend from the north, from the Gitcat Nation, Helen Clifton. Um, she and her little granddaughter are pounding the dried halibut, and her little granddaughter Janelle is learning about their culture while she's helping her grandma. And this was a common way for you to learn, wasn't it, Celilia? Just
Yes,
taking
yes.
part in everything that your family did.
Hmm. Yes, we were taught at a very young age. This is my mother. I remember when she used to teach us either harvesting plants or harvesting cedar or fish or clams or oysters or whatever. And she would tell me, she says, I'm going to show you once and I'm not going to show you again. So you watch very closely about how to clean fish or how to clean ducks, because you that was our way of, you got to really pay attention and learn, because she wasn't going to teach us. She wasn't going to teach me the second time. It was only once, and you had to pick it up really quick. So but that's how she was taught, and we had to pay attention. And cedar is, we used to harvest to go make baskets. It was part of our medicine. It was part of our cleansing, um, for bathing, and it's called spray. And so cedar was highly used in our communities, and there's a lot of stories about it as well.
Thanks, Celilia. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
these are this knowledge is so integrated and broad, but it covers. I like to say it covers all of the topics that you would learn at a university, from not just biology and botany, but also education and philosophy and political science and linguistics and everything, because it covers not just the factual information about what a plant looks like and even how it's used, what's edible and what's not, but it also encompasses the belief system, the worldview, the respect that people have, as reflected in the first salmon ceremony, for example, the way knowledge is passed on through stories and through participation, as Seliliye has talked about, and the ways of planning and making decisions about what to do and how to look after the land and the waters and so forth. So all of this, if you take any one plant like cedar, um, it embodies all of these different types of knowledge. And
Yeah,
so go ahead, Celilia.
I'm sorry, Nancy. Yeah, a lot of our teachings and values, it came by our 13 moons. We're governed by 13 moons, not by the 12 months of the calendar. We're governed by the 13 moons. And each moon would tell us when to harvest, when do we gather food, when do we go and get medicines, our ceremonies, our dancing. Um, it was our whole, like Nancy said, it's our whole philosophy. That's what governed us. And we are, and still today, we're the caregivers of this land. And our worldview is not just by plants and animals, but even our sea life. Everything in our sea is important. It's so if one chain is broken, that chain reacts all the way around into our sea, into the sea life, our fish, the seals, our sea animals, our land animals, everything is affected. And so we were always had to respect everything that's around us. And and those 13 moons is what governed us. And when do we harvest? When do we not harvest? When do we go and get clams? When do we get cedar? When do we go and get medicines? And all our ceremonies were all governed by the 13 moons.
And the moons are named after some of those activities too, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
Can I actually ask a question about the 13 moons that I've been curious for quite some time? So
Yes.
I know they don't perfectly, like they don't align with the 12-month calendar. But how do I ask this question? So in the 12-month calendar, sometimes we have 13 full moons and sometimes we only have 12. I'm wondering if you would always have all 13 moons, and if that would ever, it seems like it would like push the cycle a little later in the year if you were counting 13 moons, like your 13th moon would get later in the year every year. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I think everything's early. I've noticed in the last few years, everything is early. It doesn't coincide anymore.
Right.
I find that everything's early. I know that, say the Quellish, the Swainson thrush bird will come out to ripen all of the salmon berries. and everything's early, and it used to be really late. And even going to harvest, I noticed that we always have to go and do things. It doesn't coincide because I really think it's because of the climate change. I think that's really made a big difference in terms of the 13 moons.
Mhm. Thank you.
I've heard the same thing from other First Nations up and down the coast. For example, in the Gitcat Nation in the Smellich language, the month of May is called Halila La'ask, which means the month to gather seaweed. But nowadays, the seaweed is ready earlier than May. It didn't used to be, but makes it complicated because the seaweed is ready when there's still rain and you can't dry the seaweed properly. So it throws everything out, just as SELILIYE was saying. So
Yeah, because usually June and August is Shuntaki and Shuntantwan. Those are the months for June and August, and that's when we usually go and harvest the camas. But everything seems to be early. So our moons really don't coincide no more. It's usually a little earlier than normal. So, but these little trailing blackberries, those are, I know that we used to go, I always like to go pick those. They got so much flavor that it puts a shame to all of the other berries like Logan berries or Tay berries, but these little trailing blackberries, they've got so much flavor. It's so sweet, and I look forward to going picking them.
we always enjoy picking them together, don't we?
Yes.
And long ago, they used to make a fruit leather from these berries, from the juicy berries, by cooking them up and spreading them out on a skunk cabbage leaf, which has a waxy coating on it. You don't eat the skunk cabbage, that's not good for you, but it serves as a surface for drying the berries, and you can make your own fruit leather from these wonderful berries, and it's so nutritious and a wonderful treat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
There's the Kukwalish. That's the Swainson thrush, and she's singing her heart out, trying to put some color in all the salmon berries. So she goes from bush to bush, trying to put some color and ripen, 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 ripen. She's singing Kukwalish, 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 and she just goes around and sings her heart out.
I love that. It's a way of teaching kids about these connections too, because you can sing that song, what the Swainson thrush sings, and the children learn about the different varieties of salmon berries. There's the golden ones and the red ones and the dark ones, and the little bird is singing its heart out to ripen them all. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah. My
Oh,
favorite bird.
that brings back really nice memories of your mom and Vi Williams and the stories they told about Swainson thrush and raven, and how
Oh,
Swainson
that's
thrush
a good story.
could ripen all the berries with its song,
Yeah.
and Raven tried to ripen the berries with his song. He couldn't do it.
Oh, that was such a cute story.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
always liked that story.
yeah. Here's a little bit of what Lily was talking about, the 13 moons, all of these different resources that people rely on are available are ripen and ready to harvest at different times of the year. And so people will travel around from one place to another as the things ripen, and enjoy harvesting and then preparing and processing the food and making it ready for winter use. And so it goes over over the years, over the generations, over thousands of years, the same kinds of seasonal rounds, they call it, or cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
this,
that's why we talk about 13 moons and
SELILIYE, you talked about, we were talking earlier about using fire, the use of fire
hmm,
to maintain certain areas and to keep the open prairies good for the camas. And
mm-hmm.
that's all part of really very sophisticated ways that people had of looking after this different species and making sure that there were enough and promoting their quality and their quantity over time by looking after, tending the land, cultivating the land, all of those different practices.
That's so true. I think those practices have kind of dwindled away in the past because of Parks Canada and fisheries were always saying that we couldn't harvest any clams and we couldn't go and harvest any berries, and or it was restricted one way or another. But now that we're teaching our young people here in our communities about the berries now and about harvesting, about clearing and burning, and trying to bring that practice back, because that's how we used to make things more plentiful again. And it would bring back the camas, it would bring back more of the berries back, the black caps, as well as the wild strawberries, the huckleberries, and the trailing berries. And they'd be more plentiful then. And I remember that my mom used to do that down here and down the res here. And we used to have the controlled burning just to make things more or other types of native berries to make them more plentiful again. And so that was a practice all the time. So um, I guess the Parks Canada, what they call controlled burning. But I mean, in those days, it was a practice for us all the time. So, but I see huckleberries, and there's blue huckleberries as well, further up the mountains, the blue huckleberries. And that's what Nancy and I look forward to every summer.
That's right. Oh my goodness, I have some nice photos of you with those, the red huckleberries. Um, and just to carry on with the way people looked after and tended the different resources, they also pruned the berry bushes sometimes to make them grow better and produce more fruit, just like a farmer would prune the trees in an orchard.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah,
And
we even brought our mothers out. Nancy and I brought our mothers out to pick huckleberries.
And we would sometimes break the branches and bring them back to our mothers sitting, who they couldn't go out bushwhacking like we did. So we'd bring them branches of the berries back to pick. And they just loved that, both of them. And, you know, in a sense, the land, your territory, you could say, was common in that people could use it, but there were also protocols around who had the proprietorship, who owned certain places and oversaw those. It didn't, you needed to ask permission if you wanted to go and harvest camas or seagull eggs on somebody on an island that was recognized as belonging to someone. Am I right, SELILIYE?
Yes, yes. I remember that when we were sort of free, we could go anywhere, and we never had to ask permission. And mom and dad and my uncles and my aunts, I mean, we used to go to Pender Island, and we used to just go anywhere and get our clams and oysters and our seaweed and all our different plants. And we never used to ask permission before. Not until lately we had to start asking for permission to go and harvest seagull eggs or seaweed or picking berries, clam digging, we used to do, they did a lot of pit cooking when we used to go and get clams. And I remember one time my mom and my late mother and my late sisters and my brothers, late brothers, we used to go and harvest butter clams, and they'd get about 200-300 pounds of butters. And my mother would ask my brothers to go and dig a great big pit, and it used to be about 3 feet deep and maybe about 4 feet in width, and about another 4 feet. And it was a big pit that you can fit the 300 pounds of butter clams in there. And she would heat up the rocks, and we would layer all the clams and all of the greenery and put it in the pit, and we cooked them, and we spent a whole day doing that. And after that was nicely cooked, and then we would dry them in the open fire. And then after an open fire, and when they were nice and dry, she would my brothers would go and get some cedar bark and put it into a string, and then we would string about 5 or 6 butter clams on there, and it'd be like a necklace, and we would put it on like a necklace when we have 6 butters of clams nicely all dried. And we used to go and trade with the Yakima Indians, and we used to go down to Yakima, and we would barter with them, and we'd get our beads and blankets and whatever we needed, and that's where most of our clams would go. And yet we'd have enough to go and save for the winter time as well. So we were always doing something. Every moon we were always doing something. We were always busy.
I wrote down your mom's clam baking recipe, SELILIYE, and maybe we can share it with these folks.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're just about out of time, and maybe this is a good place to stop our talk, although we have more slides, but we wanted to keep to about an hour, and if I'm not mistaken.
Are we close to an hour already, Stephanie and me?
We started at about quarter after, so we're just over half an hour right now. So if you guys wanted to keep talking, there is absolutely time for you to keep going through some slides.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I just wanted to run through some of the foods that we've been talking about, the greens. For example, most of them are ready in the springtime, like the schamcham. Have you eaten that, SELILIYE? The horsetail shoots.
Yeah, we used to, and the sprouts. We used to eat them in the spring.
Do you call them saski?
Saski.
Yeah.
Because we used to get the new shoots from the salmon berries and the thimbleberries. We used to go and pick a bouquet of them, and I used to sit on the porch as a little girl and eat them one after the other. And they look like little necks down below there.
Yeah.
Is that little necks?
Yeah, I guess they are. Or butters, I'm not sure.
Oh.
But
that looks nice though.
Yeah, they do look good. And in the summertime, of course, there's the people would dig some camas bulbs in the early summer, and all the berries come ripe one after another. Some of them are early, like the strawberries and the elderberries and the red huckleberries, and some of them are a little bit later, like the salal berries. So yeah, lots of good nutritious
lots of
food.
good times. Yeah, especially the strawberries. They were so sweet.
Oh yeah, yes, I love those. I always look forward to them. And at the same time, there are other things that people would harvest, like cedar bark and the cattail leaves in the summertime to make mats, and people were
Mhm.
expert mat makers. I've got photos of some of the mats that the Saanich people made, and they're just beautiful.
Yeah,
And of
they the
course,
math
you go ahead
the
and talk
house,
about
eh?
Hoysum.
Oh yeah,
When
the Claxton. It's soap berries. I did some presentations over at Pender Island. Introduced the Indian ice cream to the residents of Pender, and it's an acquired taste, but I used to look forward to them because that was our treat in the winter time and the summertime. My mom would jar them, and um, that was our Indian ice cream. So I always looked forward to them when I was a kid. I used to have them all the time, and I my grandchildren, I tried to give it to them, but like I said, it's an acquired taste. But now our young people are getting pretty fancy now. They're putting different types of juice now into the soap berries, and it's easier to eat for them. So, but I like the natural taste.
I like that taste too, but it is an acquired taste. I had to
Yes.
try it quite a few times before I got to like it. But I've made it with unsweetened apple juice. Some of my friends whip banana in with it. But
Yes. They're bit-
these berries are small, but they're juicy and slightly bitter. And they have the bitterness is due to a natural detergent, um, saponin, and that's what makes it whip. So you add water to the berries and then you whip them with a special, you can use salal leaves or your
Now,
hand or a special whipper and
yeah.
whip them up like egg whites or something. And they're really pretty. They're sort of a light pink color. And then you often will eat them with a special spoon that looks like a paddle. And people really enjoy eating the soap berries. It's almost like a party when you whip them up.
I got to
Lots of
make
the
sure your
younger
bowl's nice and clean when you whip them
oh,
up, because otherwise they won't whip.
you
They're like egg whites.
that's right. You never let them get in touch with any kind of oil or grease or they won't whip. And everybody talks about that, knows that. There's one of those mats. This one is a Saanich mat that's made from tule, or the round stem bulrush that grows around the edges of lakes, like Elk Lake has quite
Uh-huh.
a few. And people used long wooden needles from the ocean spray plant and sewed, actually stitched through the stems and then used plating on the edges. And these mats, some of them are huge, and they use them for tents, for mats, for drying berries on, all kinds of things.
Hmm. Yeah, because they used it for lining the longhouses because it would be like insulation to keep the longhouse warm.
That's right. And even for room dividers, if
Mhm.
you want to have little smaller rooms within a big house, you can use those.
Is
Really
that
important.
yes, yes, it is important. Is that ocean spray,
It
Nancy?
is, Celilia. What is can you say the Sanchotha name for that?
The ocean spray is um uh
Cocktails?
yes, yes. Ocean spray, that's the flower from the ocean spray the itself. It's a hardwood, and plus when the flower is at blossoms like what you see there now, when it's blossoms, the indicator that sockeye is at its peak, and it's usually around late July, August. Most likely in August, because August is when the sockeye is usually at its peak. So when these ocean sprays are at their flowering at full bloom, that's an indicator that sockeyes at its peak.
Mhm.
Good time to go fishing.
And speaking of fishing, there is SELILIYE with her
Oh,
fish. I had to put that one in.
oh, nice. Gee, I haven't seen that picture in a long time. My grandsons, I was teaching them how to smoke some sockeye, and
She
that's our smokehouse.
looks pretty happy, eh?
Oh gosh, I really miss those days. We haven't had any sockeye now for close to 4 years now. But oh gosh, I took some of that when we went to Italy, Nancy. That
That's
fish.
right. To our slow food meetings. Everyone
Yes,
loved tasting it. Yes, that was
that was awesome.
really fun. So here's some of the foods that people would get in the fall time, the sockeye and other salmon, I guess later on the chums or dog salmon at Goldstream, right? In
Yeah,
November. And
and
the late
some yichum,
yichum,
yichum.
right? The evergreen huckleberries.
Yes,
And also the bog cranberries are ready and the peat bogs like Rithets and other bogs that the Saanich people have used for a long time, and the crab apples.
yes. That looks good.
And here's Christopher Paul again with the number one vegetable of the old days, the camas bulbs. Quitlash, is that right?
Yeah, yes.
And
Oh, yes.
yeah, he talked about how people would clear the land um, and make these beautiful meadows that the camas would grow well in. That was from a long time ago. And we talked with Bob Akerman over on Salt Spring, and he remembered how the Saanich people used to burn over the area around Fulford Harbor and up the valley there to to grow better camas and berries. So they still remember how to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing how dense the bulbs are of camas in a
Mm-hmm.
good area. This is from 1 square meter of ground, all of these bulbs. And one of our students, Kate Proctor, did her master's looking at camas, and she
Wow,
sorted the
nice.
bulbs so you can see the year-old bulbs are tiny, the 2-year-old bulbs are bigger, the 3 and 4-year-old bulbs are getting longer and longer, and they're pushing their way down into the ground. So the bigger the bulbs, the deeper they are in the soil. And when you harvest them, you can just dig around the top and flip over the turf and just select the bigger bulbs and take them out, and then put it back, burn over the areas to create sort of an instant fertilizer for the new
Mm.
plants, not the seeds into the crevices when you're digging. And if you come back 3 or 4 years later, there'll be as many bulbs again. It's
Yeah.
like and over generations, people would
Mm-hmm.
harvest the bulbs that way.
That reminds me, Nancy, that when our people used to go and harvest the camas bulbs, and if they kept harvesting and harvesting and cultivating, that's their way of cultivating. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. But that goes to the same with digging clams, the butters. We
Yeah.
used to go and dig clams, and when we used to dig them, and then and it left room for the other little clams to grow, and that's how we used to cultivate the butters as well as the little neck, and then made more room for for the other ones to grow, and it goes to the same thing with the camas. So um, we have, that was our way of cultivating, I guess you could say,
Mhm.
um, to make room for the camas, to make room for the other butters, the other little necks, for them to grow. But now that it's not active anymore, there's no room, and they're really tiny now. So I think we need to start taking our clam beds, our oyster beds, and our camas beds, we need to start cultivating and making sure that there's room for them to grow. So there's a reason for everything, I guess, eh, Nancy?
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that from many people up and down the coast, how you have to harvest it. It's part of the management of these
Mm-hmm.
species, and they need to be thinned out or they won't grow well anymore. And so
Mm-hmm.
one of our friends, Brenda Beckwith, worked on her PhD on and looked at camas tending, and she grew out some camas um, that she carefully separated and weeded. And look how big they are. You can hold just a few of them in your hand. They're that big around.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all important knowledge that goes with camas. And what happened to the camas? The livestock came in, and the deer, and I mean the cattle and the sheep and the
Yeah.
pigs. They all grazed the camas, introduced grasses, took over. People built their houses on it and on them, and converted them to farms and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
so for so many reasons, they weren't tended anymore, and camas is much less common than it used to be.
Oh, for sure. Mm-hmm. Even native deer versus the fallow deer. I know that the fallow deer are they tried eating it. They don't care for it. They prefer the native deers versus the fallow today.
Mhm. Mm,
And there's
interesting.
my nephew and my brother.
Yes, exactly. And Earl Senior and Celilia's parents and your older brother Lou
Mm-hmm.
knew about the reef net fishing, and Nick Claxton did his PhD work on revitalizing the Saanich reef net, because this is a brilliant way of fishing, selective fishing for salmon, and but it was banned as a fish trap in the early 1900s by the Canadian government. They still allowed it over on the American side, and so
Mm-hmm.
Celilia's family and others would go over to the American islands and still continue the reef net fishing there. But it's really a brilliant system of catching fish in a sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. My nephew Nick is trying to bring that back, and he's teaching the youth within our 4 communities to introduce the reef net technology. And I think they're going to be doing that this summer. So to do that traditional practice again.
Different families
Awesome.
had their own reef net sites, and they cut a swath through the kelp so that when the salmon would come through, and they put leader lines out with the dune grass tied to them, so the fish were fooled into thinking they were swimming along the bottom, but they were swimming up into the reef net, which is held
Mm-hmm.
between two canoes and made of willow bark. So the reef net is called swala. Am I right?
Yes.
Swala,
Yes.
and the willow is called swala as well. And but there was always an opening at the far end for some of the fish to escape, so that they could continue their way up the Fraser River. And then they
Mm-hmm.
held the first salmon ceremony. The first fish that they caught, they stopped fishing for 4 days while they celebrated the coming of the salmon. So the
Mm-hmm.
salmon were allowed to continue on their way for 4 days before they started fishing for their families.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And here's a quote. People were so worried about the loss of wetlands because the willow and all of the other plants that people used were found in these wetlands. And one of them in the Saanich territory, the Maber Swamp out on the peninsula, um, they talk, Earl Claxton and John Elliott wrote a book about the Saanich reef net and talked about the local swampy ground that was drained by the settlers. 5 little streams that pass through the village of Tsartlip um, have gone dry because they drained the swamp and all of the plants.
Mhm.
John Eliot's mother used to cry when we'd go by that swamp because she felt so bad about it. Cecilia Eliot, I wonder if
Yeah,
these people know what they're doing, she said, because this was the end of a whole way of life for them, the loss
yeah,
of the material to make their reef nets.
yeah. They were heartbroken, our elders, when that happened.
Medicines, herbs, berries, ducks, swamp reeds for mats and house linings, cedar for canoes. All this, she could see the end of a beautiful way of life disappearing.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Breaks my heart to think about it. And your mom witnessed a lot of losses in her lifetime.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to say there's a lot of effort now to bring back and restore some of these beautiful places again and to bring back the reef net fishing and harvesting camas bulbs. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to talk a little about your mom's 10 bark medicine.
I will. The 10 bark medicine. My mom, she was taught by her father-in-law, my dad's dad. He taught my mom how to do the 10 bark medicine, and it was a medicine for whatever ailed our people. He always made the 10 bark medicine, and he was our doctor, I guess you could say, here in Saanich, my grandfather. And I was fortunate enough that my mother taught me about the 10 bark medicine, and she shared it with Nancy. And I cried one day because I said to Nancy, I said, gee, I remember my mom talking about the 10 bark medicine, but I can't remember the ingredients. And Nancy said, I've got them all. And I was very, very happy and fortunate that Nancy spent that time with my mom, and she wrote it down. And that I'm just so happy that happened, because it would have been lost if Nancy didn't say that. And my mom is harvesting the 10 barks right there in the picture. And she taught me that, my mom taught me that before she left us. And she was already, I think, in her 90s in that picture. Um,
Yeah.
she was teaching us how to make baskets too, as well, and cedar baskets, Nancy and I, and she was showing us the 10 bark medicine. And Nancy and I keep saying we're going to get out there and do that, and we just don't have the time. We always say when we retire, it seems like we've gotten more busy, more and more
Both of
busy,
us. Uh,
both of us. And I just wanted to share that one little that story about how the people caught salmon. Um, Once there was no seals, so the people were starving, and they lived on elk and whatever that other game they could kill. And these two brave youths from Saanich said to each other, let us go and see if we can find another salmon. They embarked in their canoe and they headed out to the sea, not caring what direction they traveled. And they journeyed for 3.5 months, and they came to a strange country. When they reached the shore, a man came out and welcomed them, saying, you have arrived, you have arrived. And he says, yes, we have. And the youth answered that we are here now. And they said that they were expecting them. And so they asked them to come in, and they shared a meal, and they shared their teachings, and they were there after they eaten, had their dinner. The host led them outside the house and said, look around and see what you can see. They looked around and they saw smoke coming from Gurming, and the steelhead and the sockeye and the spring and other varieties of fish Well, anyways, the youth stayed there for quite a while. They stayed there, and the host said, "Well, I think you must go home tomorrow." And everything was arranged for you, and the salmon that you were looking for will muster at your home and start off on their journey. So you must follow them. So the two young youth followed the salmon, and and every night they took gahming and they burned it on their way home. They burnt some gahming on the beaches, and finally they reached Discovery Island, and they burnt some more gahming. And for the host had said to them, burn gahming along the beach when you reach your land, when you reach land to feed the salmon that travel with you. That way you could treat salmon, the salmon will treat you well if you treat them well, and you will always have them in abundance. And that is why gahming is so important. So then our young youth finally got home, and they had plenty of salmon at Discovery Island, and they taught their families about the other places, about Fraser and Nanaimo. And because their journey took them 3.5 months, salmon are now are absent in the coast for that period of each year. The coho had said to the other salmon, "You can go ahead of us as far as we have not yet got what we wanted from the lakes." This is why the cohos are always the last of the salmon. And the young men now have salmon, but no good way of catching them. The leaders of the salmon, a real man and a woman, taught them how to make the swala, and that's when the reef nets came about. And so the reef nets and the gahming is important to the Saanich people, and that's how um, the salmon became in abundance to our Saanich people. And that was a story told by my late dad, Johnny Claxton, and that's how I learned about the kahming, and that's how come it's important to our Saanich people. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm glad you shared that, SELILIYE. We've sort of talked a little bit about it before, but that gives the complete story, and why
Mhm.
the reef net is important, and why the willow is important, the wetlands and all of the different places where they gather plants for that reef net. They all tie in together with the kachmin
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
the respect that people have for the fish and the plants and the medicines all. I think we'll just quickly finish this part about the 10 barks medicine, and then I think that's a good place for us
Mhm.
to stop.
Mhm.
So this is the 10 barks medicine, and it's sweetened with the licorice fern, seep, it's
Yeah.
called. The
See, yeah.
rhizomes are very sweet, and they help to make the medicine sweet because the tree barks are a little bit bitter. But
Mhm.
there's 10 different kinds, and including the cascara and cherry bark and crabapple bark and other trees. And we tasted it when Belinda's mom prepared it. It tasted like the forest, didn't it?
Yes.
Tasted
Yes.
like drinking the forest. It was just the most beautiful, fragrant, foresty taste.
Mhm.
And it was used by generations of your family going back.
I think not only um, we benefit from all of the trees and all the 10 barks and all the different types of plants as our medicines. Um, I can share one more story about my grandfather when he was chopping wood, and he went and hammered. He sharpened or his axe. He went and sharpened it so sharp that he 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 broke his thumb, and he told my mom to go into the wilderness and go and look for a snail, a slug. And so my mom went and looked for one, and she got this slug and she brought it to my grandfather. And because he just, I guess, chipped a bone or something in his thumb, or so he took that slug and he cut it in half lengthwise, and he put that on his thumb, and he covered it up with a rag and for a bandage. And he did this every day for about a week, and then his injury got better. And so I asked Nancy about that. I said, I wonder why they would use a slug, because I never got to meet my grandfather, and I didn't have a chance to ask my mother. And the conclusion we came to is that the slugs eat a lot of greenery. So it was a lot of medicine, I would think, I guess, eh, Nancy?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So it has some of the medicinal compounds from the plants that it eats in it. Yeah, yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
SELILIYE. That was
And his thumb healed up.
that's a great story. So there's much, much more. We've kind of touched the surface and talked about a few plants. We won't talk too much about the environmental destruction that's happened because we are all aware of that. But I think this is a lesson that we would like to leave you with, that learning and caring about the cultural richness and biological diversity in our own home places, wherever we live, is something that all of us can do to help. And it can bring endless fascination in our own lives and make a difference in the future. And
Yes,
learning by doing, learning by
Mhm.
doing. And we'll leave you with this beautiful flower. I spent a lot of time with Elsie and Vi looking for this flower. We traveled all over looking for it because it's a good luck flower. And I couldn't find it. And we brought Vi home to Pakwachin. And there it was growing right by her house.
And here we drove all the way up to Nanaimo looking for it. Here it was down here close to Sidney.
Yeah.
But I remember another story. I went picking, getting some medicine with my late mother and my late cousin Irene from Songhees, Irene Cooper. And we were looking for some medicine, and I only remember the Sanchatan names, but I don't know the English names. It was called Seascultin and Seascultin Tanad. It was a male and a female plant. And she says, I need to get the roots. And I said, okay. So we were busy looking for the plants, and then she showed me what they looked like. And she was walking ahead of me, and then finally I said, Irene, you keep passing the plants. I said, you keep passing them. I said, and she says, where, honey? I can't see it, she says. And I said, right there. She says, where? And she couldn't see them. And I thought she was just pulling my leg, and she honestly couldn't see them. So anyway, we were harvesting the roots of these two, the male and female plants. And then we finally got out of the wilderness, and I said, Irene, here's your plants. And she says, honey, I can't see them. And she says, then I'm going to tell you why I can't see them. Those plants were hiding away from me. And I said, oh. I said, how come? She says, because I have bad intentions. And I said, oh no. And I said, well, what were you going to do with them? And she says, well, my grandson's got a new girlfriend, and I was going to split them apart by using these medicines, and those medicines hid away from me. So that's how come I couldn't see them. And so I said, oh no. I said, cousin Irene. And she says, now you got to respect the plants, because if you don't respect them, they're not going to respect you. So she says, that's a lesson for me and you today, she said. I said, okay, cousin. So they do have feelings. They know what you're going to do. They know your intentions. So respect your plants, she said. And that's my lesson for today.
A wonderful way to end. Thank you, SELILIYE.
You're welcome.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
to
I
all of
think
you.
we always hear from our different partners, when is restoring enough? Aren't we doing enough? Haven't we already start restoring the forest? But I think that with your eyes, we realize that maybe there are many plants we are not seeing yet, and maybe because our intention has not been fully expressed yet. And we know that many of the partners have the intention of restoring this beautiful land, and I hope that those plants will show up to them and really show good intention and goodwill, and the idea of, you know, connecting as you have allowed us today. So thank you so much. I am totally caught by your stories.
Yes, I agree. Thank you both so much for sharing. I can't even express how much it means to me to be able to hear these stories, SELILIYE, especially stories that you're sharing from your ancestors and your family members. I always tear up. I recognize the importance of these stories. So thank you so much for sharing them with us today.
Thanks, SELILIYE.
Thank you, Dee. And thank